Hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the AI Momentum series. This is a fifth episode in our series here where Lantern explores how we can help organizations unlock key capabilities, in this case, their structured data, to move beyond proof of concepts in AI and to scale AI value. So some quick introductions for today. My name is Jeremy Bierlein. I'm your host as always here. I'm a principal technology strategist here at Lantern, which means I get to work with our great clients on a variety of their transformation ambitions. I'm joined for the second time here in the AI Momentum series by Mr. Jeff Johnston, data platform guru extraordinaire and principal technology strategist. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself again?
You bet. Hey guys, I'm Jeff. I'm based here in Dallas, 25 years in the app dev and data and AI space, and 18 years here with Lantern. It's always a privilege to kind of be here today with you and to talk with you guys about this. Looking forward to it and ready to see what we can uncover here.
Excellent. We warned you that there'd be some polls, there'd be some audience participation. So let's get to the first one here. So, and good news, I teased you about this one earlier, so you shouldn't be surprised. Where is your organization on your Fabric journey? We'll give you a minute or two to select an option. As you select an option, you will see the results up on the screen. And this is super helpful to us. Thank you for responding, because it helps us gauge where everybody is at and sort of tailor the conversation as we go along. Jeff, when we stop and think about how long Fabric has been around as a platform, that's pretty amazing in terms of this, where people are at and other things like that.
Absolutely. Just a few years now. Granted, some of the piece parts of Fabric have been around for a while and have been reconstituted under the umbrella of Fabric, but certainly just a couple of years old here that we're talking about Fabric being generally available.
Tremendous progress for sure. Thanks everybody for voting. So a couple of things we'll cover today. I'll start with a little story time. This, for some of you, you may have gotten a request similar to the story that I'm about to share, so stay tuned. Jeff will give you an overview of what Fabric data agents are. They're still a public preview. We're expecting some announcements here at FabCon about when they will go general availability. So a little bit of grounding on that. Some ways that they help you unlock your trusted data. First and foremost, that's your structured data living in those repositories, but data agents can do even more than that. What are some of the use cases that Fabric data agents are good for? They're a blade in the Swiss Army knife of your agentic tool belt. So what's the right answer for that? And where do they fit in and where can they contribute to this overall agentic ecosystem? With that, I want to start with a bit of a story. Go back all the way back almost 2 years to the spring of 2024. Maybe you have received requests like this from your leadership or your organization. If so, I'm sorry if I'm bringing back anxiety and memories. So this was a request that landed in my lap prior to joining Lantern. And it was basically hey, we need a chat with our data bot for these scanned maintenance forms. So when I say scanned maintenance forms, it literally was a wide variety of formats, decades, scanned with the old style, non-generative OCR technology. Hey, we've got 6 weeks to build a demo. It should be simple, right? So I can see, even though we don't have video on, I can see a few of you smiling right here. So let's walk through how this went. So the application that we were talking about here was a relatively straightforward 2-tier web application. So there was this web front end that basically you could browse your digital filing cabinet, was the easiest way to think about it, of these maintenance records that were aligned to these assets that were very valuable. In a lot of cases, these were important from a compliance perspective. And then literally decades of these scanned records sitting in an Azure SQL database. In some cases, they had the original scan and the extract. In some cases, just the data extract from the OCR. What were some of the challenges when we immediately aimed Azure OpenAI at this? So why would AI struggle? First of all, that OCR data was never really normalized. It came in a variety of different formats from a variety of different places around the world, and it basically kind of got dumped into tables as best as it could fit. It had a typical database naming structure, right? One of the things I'll often discuss with clients is that when I'm talking with business users about why is this hard, it's like, If you can't crack open the database underneath your application and you can't understand it, generative AI, the English major of the AI family, is also going to struggle to understand it. Third reason, in this application, this has been an application that had been deployed and in use by this organization's customers for more than 15 years. But there had never been any sort of data dictionary or catalog introduced to the overall application architecture. And the other piece is that some of the business use cases that were going to be valuable for this really needed some new relationships in order to be the most valuable and showcase sort of the opportunities that were available with this filing cabinet worth of data. With 6 weeks, an interesting data challenge, a relatively flat application, how did we do it? And I'm going to say right up front, this was great for demoware, but don't do this, or at least don't do most of this. So first step, we created some views over that data. We enriched it a little bit. We gave those views much more human-friendly naming, and we flattened those relationships. This was about GPT-4, so we played around with GPT-4o and other things to begin to aim the model at these views. And then one of the things you can do for setting a context of an interaction in generative AI is you can do pre-prompting. And if you dumped it out into a Word document, there would literally be probably 7 to 8 paragraphs of pre-prompts for this particular interaction. Basically, tell it everything. Here is the table structure. Here's what this data element means. Basically, literally explaining the data and all of its relationships to the generative AI model before it answered the first question on an interaction. We got something out the door that could answer a base set of interesting questions, but the great news is there's now a better way. So before we go there, though, I'd love to do a poll of where you are with playing around with interacting with your structured data. What are some of your biggest blockers to enabling chat with your structured data? We know there's many. Go ahead and pick your best one here. Okay, data silos is off to a strong lead. Data definition, yeah, usually the data definition people are the people who have tried this and are discovering how incomprehensible random tables of data are to their AI endeavors. Okay. Yep. Data definition, business meaning. Yep. Exactly. Well, and sometimes it's not even data dictionary or a layer like that. It's even just getting to business agreement on what does this metric actually mean. Well, this is great. Thank you for this. So the good news is with Fabric data agents and advancement of technology 2 years later, there's a lot better way. There's a much better way to unlock your data for AI. So Jeff, go ahead and take it away. Walk us through how Fabric data agents can help close the gap.
You bet. Will do, Jeremy. Thank you. I think where the Fabric data agent story starts is with what was announced at Microsoft Ignite last fall, where they announced the arrival of a few different technologies, right? Fabric IQ, which is related to Microsoft's data platform, Foundry IQ, which is focused on Microsoft's AI platform, and then Work IQ, which is more focused on the modern work and productivity platform. The overall, what was behind this announcement, Fabric IQ, was really, we all know that AI agents are more effective when you have a unified data platform that's powering those agents, right? And we know that they're only as good as the data that they're grounded in. And so what Fabric IQ was trying to bring to the table and what is attempting to bring to the table here is to add a lot more context, understanding, and meaning to the business connection between all of your data and the business value that these different connections and relationships and so on can bring in order to provide more effective context to an AI agent. And so, if we think about it, every team in an organization has a different view of the enterprise, right? So you've got individuals and teams that may grapple with some of this understanding and trust of data. You've got different business units that finance is worried about finance stuff. Sales is worried about sales stuff, and so on and so forth. And so they don't really understand in some cases, how the ins and outs of the different business units inside of an organization operate. And then from an enterprise perspective, it is a challenge, right? Which is part of why we're in business, to really bring that holistic view of the enterprise together. And so Fabric IQ kind of represents this capability to create some of these shared connections across all the systems, the data, the processes, the enterprise, help tie all that together and provide more context, especially for those AI agents. And so specifically, Fabric IQ is that semantic foundation to power your business in AI and provide that business understanding. And we do this in the Fabric platform through a few different components, right? We do this first and foremost through Ontology, which is something that's brand new to Fabric. It's kind of the enterprise vocabulary, if you will, of the semantic layer, and helps unify the meaning and relationships between the different elements of your data. And also it enables that graph database as well inside of Microsoft Fabric. So it creates those nodes and edges to understand where it needs to direct its inquiries as these agents are reasoning through the data and through all of this new information that we have. Then with Fabric IQ, we've brought forth Fabric Data Agents, which is what we're talking about today, and then operations agents for more real-time data. And although we're not going to show operations agents today, we're going to stick to the ontologies and Fabric Data Agent. But if you guys are interested in finding out more about that, let us know in the comments and we'll be happy to have a follow-up session. So first, I want to show you guys what it means to create a Fabric ontology in a very simple scenario, right? We're going to show a quick little demo. And so with this demo, I'm in my Fabric workspace. I've got several of my objects here. This is a Zava do-it-yourself. It's a fictional Washington State home improvement company with 8 different locations, right? You can see all the different objects that I have here, including my warehouse. I got a couple of ETL pipelines, right? I've got my semantic model here as well. And then my transactional database hosted in Fabric also. And so when we click into the semantic model, this is kind of where I'm going to start the creation of our ontology. You see, we have a very clean semantic model with our dimensions across the top, our fact tables down on the left side, and got very clean relationships and overall fairly simplistic data model because this is a demo data set, right? And so you can see at the top, we have a new item in the ribbon bar there that says generate ontology. And so from this, we can click on this to start the authoring process for our ontology. And so first thing we're going to do is give it a name. In this case, I'm just naming it ONT Zava Retail with my silly prefix naming convention. And this starts to generate this ontology built off of, the data that you have in your semantic model. And so automatically it detects. So if we click into the date entity, it detects which relationships that the date entity has, which relationships the store entity has. We can click on each one of these and it kind of walks us through what relationships each one of these entities have. And we look at our order item. This is one of our fact tables. So this is kind of where a lot of things come together. And so from this perspective, we can really see what information is there and perhaps what information is missing. Like we need to add, we need to tell it to make sure how it can identify unique rows. So we need to make sure we specify the order item key as the entity key. Same thing for our other fact table inventory snapshot as well. So we can manipulate this. We can add more metadata to the ontology as well. But all of this particular business for a couple of different domains in terms of sales and inventory. If you get a very complex business, you can see how you might leverage this to be able to model out your business as well. So wanted to kind of just quickly show you what it takes to create an ontology. Now, granted, we're building that from an existing semantic model. So, from that perspective, it made it very easy to start with. So if we go back to our workspace here, we can see that our ontology, it also creates a graph model and a couple other objects as well in our workspace to support that ontology. These are all things it kind of just does automatically as you go through and create that. So you can start to see kind of why Fabric IQ was kind of an important addition to this data agent story, because we'll continue to weave this into our Fabric data agent creation here in just a little bit. All right. So next, what I want to do is kind of talk through Fabric data agents themselves. And so now we've got that ontology built, which is one of the first steps that we want to do. You're assuming you already have your warehouse, lakehouse, or semantic model, or maybe even if you're on the operational side, your event house for real-time data coming in. But now that we have that ontology built, I think it's important to just pause for just a minute. And Jeremy alluded to this, is that it's, as AI and machine learning has matured over the years, and especially since the generative AI evolution has occurred upon us over the last few years, kind of one of those very elusive capabilities was our ability to really conversationally work with structured data very naturally. And this data has kind of always been trapped behind technical barriers, whether it is accessible by only those that could write SQL or develop dashboards or be one of the analysts. With Fabric data agents, what this is really about is a further democratization of access to all of your structured data that exists in your enterprise. And so we can do this by creating these Fabric data agents and allowing these trusted conversations for folks to have with their data in plain English or plain language, and making sure that the enterprise grade security continues to stay built in. So data agents give you that ability to have those conversational AI experiences that answer questions about your data. And currently we've got the following sources supported. Granted, data agents are still in preview. And as Jeremy mentioned, we expect some announcements around this in the Fabric conference coming up. Traditional Fabric warehouse, your lakehouse, your event house, which is for real-time data, your KQL databases, your semantic models, which we all know and love. If you have developed any Power BI reports and created semantic models there. And then we have a couple of new sources that we can add to our Fabric data agent as well. One being the ontology, which we just created. And one is AI search, which they recently added, which is a vector database for unstructured data. So taking your documents and vectorizing those through Azure AI search, and then making those available to your Fabric data agents as well. Now, what I will be showing here a little bit has to do with the ontology, semantic models, and warehouses. Some of these other ones, again, if you guys are interested in that, we're happy to have a follow-up conversation with. Okay, so we're getting started with Fabric data agents. So what do we need to get started? And so first thing to understand is that you need a paid Fabric capacity, right? So an F2 or above, it doesn't take much to get started with this, which is the minimum Fabric capacity that you need to get going. So from there's a few tenant settings that you need to be aware of. You need to make sure that the tenant setting for Fabric data agents is set to enabled. You need to make sure that the tenant settings for users can use Copilot and other features powered by Azure OpenAI is enabled. There's a couple of cross-geo processing tenant settings for AI that need to be enabled. And then the Power BI semantic models via XML endpoints setting needs to be enabled also. So these are all kind of part of those prerequisites that you need to make sure that you can have a good, productive Fabric data agents experience. I would say make sure that you work with your security teams. There's a link here that you can learn more about all the privacy and security related to Copilot and how Microsoft uses OpenAI's models within the secure tenant of Azure related to Fabric and Fabric data agents. Perfect. So now let's talk about all the different components of a Fabric data agent. I call it the kind of the anatomy of a Fabric data agent. And I know there's a lot on this slide. I've tried to simplify this as much as I can, but there's a few different pieces to this. And I think it's good to walk through this just a little bit so that you can understand what we're dealing with here, right? And so at the highest level, the first piece to talk about is kind of this, if we're talking anatomy, we want to understand where the brain is, right? And the brain really is this AI or LLM layer that is going to kind of orchestrate and leverage generative AI to work with our data. And it's leveraging all the Azure OpenAI APIs under the hood and behaves like an agent, right? And so it processes those user questions. It determines the most relevant data source to use if there's multiple that you've chosen. And it invokes the appropriate tools to generate, validate, and execute queries along the way. You don't need to supply your own API keys or anything like that. Fabric just uses Microsoft's managed Azure OpenAI Assistant to handle all that authentication and so on for you. So kind of the next piece, the number 2 over to the left side, is all the data sources or kind of the body of knowledge. So you can add these data sources that we mentioned a minute ago and the ones that are shown here on the screen as sources. And I'll show you exactly how this works. You can actually see the processing occurring as you're asking your questions. You can even see the queries that it is issuing down to your semantic model or to your warehouse or lakehouse as well. We'll show you that also. And so then we get to aspects of the nervous system along the way, kind of all their multi-step processes of, hey, I've got a user asking a question. I've got a question to parse and validate. I've got to check my data sources. I've got to generate my queries. I've got to validate and execute those queries and so on. And so all of those are kind of part of that pipeline. And with those queries, there's some built-in intelligence for natural language. It converts it to SQL queries. There's natural language. It converts it to DAX. Natural language, it converts these queries or these natural language queries to KQL queries for their KQL database. So there's lots of different things that are really happening under the covers that is interesting in the sophistication of these data agents. And so we go through, we validate and execute those queries. And then we're also weaving in, as part of that, any instructions that we have given to the overall agent. So there's an instructions dialogue that we load up instructions for, provide more context and more coaching to the data agent to make sure that if there is a question about this or that, that we make sure we specify the prioritization of it and so on. And instructions are very important. If any of you have created any type of agent before, this paradigm exists in other agent authoring environments as well. And then we have the security layer. So this is kind of the immune system from a Fabric data agent perspective, right? So Fabric data agents respect all of the row level security, column level security, and those types of things that you already have in place with your data platform. Data agents respect that and they just sit on top of that. So access is provided through Intra ID, and the agent can only surface data to the user that user has access to. Just know that all of that work that you have done implementing those security models, Fabric data agents does respect that security piece. The last thing here is around the integration and publishing layer and where you can publish these data agents to. And so, yes, data agents can be available to people that are using Fabric, but when you publish it, it enables its MCP protocols. So you can publish it out to M365 Copilot and Teams, which we'll show you. And then these agents can then be consumed by other agents, whether you've created these other agents in Azure AI Foundry or custom applications as well. So this is kind of just a quick tour around the anatomy of how these agents are formulated and what goes on in this particular context of Fabric data agents. So now that we've kind of got all of that background, let's dive in and head over to the demo. That way we can see what it takes to create one of these guys. So we're back here in our Fabric workspace, and Fabric data agent is constituted by creating a new item in our workspace. Now I have favorited the data agent. You can see it's flagged as being in preview. Make sure that you may have to click over to all items if you don't have yours favorited. But as soon as we select the data agent to create one, we got to give it a name. So we'll give our agent a name, Zava Retail Data Agent, and click create. When we get into this authoring environment, the first thing it prompts us toward is to add some data sources, right? So first thing we're going to do is add a data source. And you can see we've got our 3 data sources available to us here, our warehouse, our ontology, and our semantic model as a part of our workspace. And first thing I'm going to do is add our warehouse as a data source. So all the dimensionally modeled dimensions and facts that I had sitting in my Fabric warehouse, we're going to go through and select each one of these dimensions and facts to add them to as a data source to my data agent. Then we can go through and make sure that we add our semantic model, because we know that anybody that's created semantic models before, you've created calculated measures and calculated columns and other artifacts that are a part of that model that may not exist in your underlying low-level data. So we're going to make sure that we add all of those objects to our data agent as well. And then finally, we created that ontology before. And you're like, where are you going with this ontology thing, Jeff? Well, we can add our ontology as a source as well. And you can see it brings in all of those entities, all of those relationships, all of that additional business context to our data agent as well. And then the next step we need to do is make sure that we add our agent instructions. So it kind of gives some out-of-the-box instructions here for us to potentially leverage. I generated some other instructions. You can use AI to help you generate your instructions. And then as you go through the testing and validation process, you can refine your agent instructions as well. And so I know that's one of our big lessons learned that we'll talk about when we get to that here in a little bit. So now that we've created our data agent, you can see that it exists in our workspace here. And I'm going to click on that to that now issue a couple of queries to this. And let's see what the results are. So I'm going to close my agent instructions and I'm going to go down here, and you can see at the top too, like it's got some sample questions that we can ask. In this case, I'm going to ask my own question. What was the total revenue by store last quarter? And oh, by the way, please include year and quarter in the response. And the reason why I did that was just to make sure I could go back and validate that the data that it is bringing back here is valid, matches up with a test harness that I created. And you can click into and actually see the steps. And you can see, in this case, a DAX query that it is issued to the semantic model. You can take that, copy that out, go into your DAX query view in your semantic model as an author of the data agent and check the values and check all of that. Now, since this happened in my semantic model, I'm going to go back over here as my test harness and issue a SQL query that I know would work against my warehouse, right? And I can issue that and then use that to check to make sure that my data from my SQL environment, my data from my semantic model, that all matches up with what my Fabric data agent is creating. So yeah, all of that matches, that all looks good. And we can check the box on that. So now we know that our data is looking good and our agent is bringing back correct results. We can ask another questions like, hey, which product categories drive the highest revenue and margin? And so it'll reason over that. It'll determine which data source it should leverage. And then it brings back our answer, right? So here's the highest revenue categories. Here's the highest margin categories. And then it gives a little summary. And it even says, hey, if you want me to do a deeper dive, I can do that also. What about another question? Which stores are at risk due to low inventory or high revenue products? And so in this case, it may be a question where there maybe is no risk. And that is the case here. Hey, right now, no stores have low inventory levels, or at least at the reorder point for the highest revenue generated products. based on what we see in the data. You can always go back and check that as well. And so anyway, this is just quick way to kind of go through and show you exactly what it takes to create an agent. It's pretty simple, as you can see, right? It's not a terribly hard, configuration exercise. But I think where some of the time comes in is when you start to get into you're rolling this out to your business users, and you want to make sure you're understanding the types of questions that they are asking, what their expectations are, and making sure that you're tweaking the instructions, your calculations, your metadata to make sure all of that lines up with the overall outcome that you're shooting for here with your data agents. Perfect. Now that you've kind of gotten the nickel tour of what it takes to create a Fabric data agent, I'd like to share just a few things from our early deployments with Fabric data agents on what we've learned. And hopefully this will help you out as well as you guys start down this journey. Everyone should understand that generative AI agents are by nature and by definition probabilistic. In other words, it's using probabilities and statistical algorithms to determine what it thinks the answers to your questions should be, right? But there are times when users expect answers to these questions to be deterministic, meaning that a little bit more towards the rules-based end of the spectrum versus the probabilistic end of the spectrum. That's just purely statistics. And so we want to make sure that we do everything that we can do to try to make these agents more deterministic or as deterministic as possible at times. I think the way that we do that is number one, through your instructions. So make sure you have instructions, detailed instructions in that agent instructions area so that we can make sure that all of those things are considered and accounted for. We don't want to make it all things to all people. Make sure agents are narrowly scoped, have more specialized agents with fewer sources and fewer tables and columns if possible. That will just increase the likelihood of the agent's ability to understand all the context that you're dealing with in the questions that you're asking. You can strengthen those agent instructions with priority order and more of a fixed output and schema. Make sure that you spend time experimenting with how you can structure those agent instructions. You can add sample questions. So in those sample questions, you can actually specify the exact query, whether it's a DAX query, KQL query, or SQL query that you want to use for that particular sample question. So that just really gives you that ability to be very deterministic, saying this is what you're going to use in that particular sample question. Then make sure that you've got a repeatable evaluation harness. Make sure that you create your queries like I just showed you. It's a very simple thing, but make sure that you are able to evaluate the output that the agents are providing before you roll these things out broadly, and have users that you work with that will really stress test these things, ask questions about sensitive data, ask questions, kind of red team it a little bit as well, so that you can test whether or not that agent is going to handle those responses appropriately. So those are a handful of things that we've learned from that perspective. Also, where we have seen a lot of success is making sure we publish these agents, make them discoverable. And since Microsoft rolled out in December the ability to consume these agents directly from M365 Copilot, this is a huge lift, right? Because now it kind of really makes these things very accessible to users that are using Copilot every day from a productivity perspective. Now we can do that with these Fabric data agents as well. At this time, Copilot Chat, so the free version of Copilot, can't call a Fabric data agent, but we'll see if that changes anytime in the future. But at least at the moment, that was one of the questions we've gotten from some of our customers in the past. Also know that agents always run under intra ID, and sometimes does not, or Copilot, I should say, does not elevate privileges. Based on what I mentioned earlier, the agent will respect the security models that you have put in place on your data, and all the permissions, role level security, all of those things are enforced. And then And then the next thing that I think is good to understand is interacting via Teams. So once you publish that, especially now that we can publish that to Copilot, it is now accessible in Teams in the left nav if you've got a Copilot license and you'd like to do that. You can also use Copilot Studio to consume Fabric data agents as well and publish those directly as agents you can chat with in Teams also. But let's just take a quick look at what this publishing experience is so that you can kind of see what this looks like. And we'll go quickly here because we want to leave some time for Q&A as well. So I'm in my workspace and I want to make sure I launch my Fabric data agent here. So we'll go down and click on that. And at the top in the menu bar, you can see this publish icon. So we can click publish for that. And then we want to make sure we add a description to our agent and then also make sure that toggle to publish to the agent store in M365 Copilot is turned on. And when we have published it, now we can see our API that the agent is published to in case we need to use that for anything else. And we've got this model context protocol as well, the URL and the information for that. So I'm going to head over to M365 Copilot. And over on the left side, you can see that my Zava retail data agent shows up, right? So this is great that now I can go right to my Copilot experience and Copilot becomes the UI for AI, right? And so I can take that and start to ask questions of my agent and it will return results just like it would in the Fabric experience as well. You can see it connects to the data agent MCP server and then provides those results. And you can also say, hey, I want to see this not only as text, I want to see this as a visualization or a chart as well. And so we may want to go down and just say, hey, can you re-render this as a visualization? And so we'll do that quickly as a column chart. And there we go. Now it's not the most beautiful column chart you've ever seen in your life, but it is nice that we do get this ability to do that. And so we've seen the Copilot experience here. If we launch into Teams and over on the left nav, we have that Copilot button available to us. And so when we click on that, now it gives us that same experience, right? Where we can have access to our retail agent and ask questions appropriately. So just want to quickly show you guys that and make sure that you understood how we can do that. So that kind of gives you kind of the end-to-end experience. Now that we have everything published and we wanted to make sure that you guys understood kind of what is this whole MCP thing? What about multi-agent scenarios? We've got agents talking to agents and consuming agents, right? This is important because as we go along, more and more scenarios, we're going to have multi-agent solutions that we create. And it's nice that Power BI, when we create data agents, MCP is enabled by default. And so kind of what is model context protocol? Got some information here on that. It's very novel. It's very new and kind of liken it to just like when the internet was new, we had hypertext transfer protocol, that HTTP at the beginning of your URLs and how we use that to communicate to these different websites, these remote servers that were all over the world. Well, model context protocol allows us to communicate to agents and have agents communicate to other agents as well. Anyway, wanted to do that. And I know we're running a little short of time. And so I'm probably going to skip this quick MCP demo. There's tons of resources out there on that and are happy to make sure that you guys get some of those resources and we're happy to follow that with you as well. So I think in summary, you guys were asking about best practices earlier. It's make sure you get the semantic layer right. That's the foundation for this thing. These data agents really rely on that and all of the other context, that critical metadata. And you can even use, and that's part of what MCP can do for you, is you can use GitHub Copilot to create all your descriptions for all your tables and all of your columns and so on. Make sure you get those instructions right in your data agent, test it, tune it, and then enable users with organizational change enablement best practices, right? And so following kind of this piece, I think you can, this process, you can make sure that Fabric data agents are rolled out successfully. So I've been talking a lot, and I know we want to hit one more poll. And so I want to make sure that based on what you guys have heard about with Fabric data agents today, how soon do you think that you'll be exploring these things, right? And we'd love to take a minute and get your feedback on that.
A lot of folks excited for Fabric data agents, Jeff.
I hope so. We're ready to get started now.
It has been interesting, even though this feature is still public preview. We've had several of our clients, including some folks who are joining us today, who have taken the early plunge on exploring what Fabric data agents can do for them. And so I think this is, for us, it is not the be all end all for everything, but it is an incredibly useful tool for folks who are into the Fabric ecosystem already to unlock a lot of this stuff. So excellent. Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm just going to do a couple of recap slides and we'll open it up for questions here. So I think just a few things as you keep in mind. So again, critical success factors, Jeff, we're talking about. It's all about understandability and context, whether that's a semantic layer, ontology, all of the different things you can do, even data catalog, to be able to give the AI the best running shot at understanding the data you're looking for in those queries. Explain and constrain for the best, most predictable outcomes. Generative AI, you've used it. It's an imprecise science at times. It takes some interesting bounces. So Jeff unpacked a couple of different ways in that one slide about how you put helpful guardrails in place to aim it in there. Likewise, scaling the value of AI-driven experiences. This last one here, there's really two things here. I think number one, being able to say, hey, look, for large scale data workloads or data insights you need to share broadly in the organization, M365 Copilot, the front door you have possibly invested in your organization as your general purpose AI front door for your employees, anything from Fabric data agents can easily be surfaced there. And then again, enabling agents within this multi-agent ecosystem. There are places, I was just talking through a use case with a manufacturing client yesterday about it needing to reach into some PLM data that's in Fabric in order to be able to understand if they've done a product like this before. So some really great and helpful things here. Two other reminders real quick before we get going on questions. First of all, we are in that time of year. We're in Microsoft's back half of their fiscal year. And so this is a great time, Jeff, if you want to go to the next slide. Microsoft has rolled out some investments here for the second half of the year, both in early stage platform rollout for Fabric, as well as building AI initiatives on top of that. This is sort of first come, first surge funding. So go ahead, reach out to us and we can have some conversations about what this might mean for stretching your budgets to accomplish interesting things. And then the second thing, we mentioned it earlier, we're expecting, anticipating, hoping for some announcements around Fabric data agents at FabCon. So what we'd like to have you do here is if you're going to FabCon and you have the Whova app, reach out to me. You'll see me in there, or you can contact us from the website. We'd love to get you connected and see you at FabCon and say hello live and in person. So with that, let's go ahead and land on the slide where we'll do some Q&A. I'll go back through some of the questions, Jeff. By the way, in the slide here, you see LinkedIn connections for both Jeff and I. Go ahead and hit us up there. So Crispin asked, Jeff, can you define a taxonomy on top of ontology? Can I use industry standard ontologies if my industry has one?
Yes. So the way that I showed that is creating the ontology generated from a semantic model, or you can generate one on top of another model, but you can also just create one on your own. And so I think adding an industry standard would be a great way to do that. Now, it's a manual process. You have to click each entity and define it, and then tie each one of those elements inside that entity to elements in a table, to a column. in your underlying database. But yes, it can be done.
Excellent. Blake asks, what's the benefit of building a Fabric data agent using an ontology versus a semantic model? Doesn't sound like they're even mutually exclusive necessarily.
Yes, they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, in the example I showed, we built both, right? And brought both of those as sources into our agent. And so really what the ontology does is it's expected to bring that business understanding, that business context, not just the technical context, but the business context to your model. Not everybody follows the best semantic modeling and dimensional modeling best practices when they create their semantic models, but you can use the ontology as a way to bring that business understanding context into your data agent.
And then one last question, what is the role of semantic model and ontology for this agent? Is it more than just really being able to give the AI experience as much of a running start on context as possible?
Yeah, really, that's what it is, right? It's what are all those things that we can ground the agent in, just like RAG architectures with unstructured data. We want to make sure that we're able to provide a lot more, the value with agents is the more context that we can provide, the more effective the answers can be. And that's the experience with ontologies.
Excellent. Steve was evidently busting out his stopwatch, and he made a comment that it was about 66 seconds for a top products query to come back for business expectation. And so he's talking sort of like, are we seeing tunability within Fabric data agents being able to apply, let's say an organization is making certain Azure AI reservation commitments or other things. Are there basically ways to tune performance versus cost within Fabric data agents?
So it's going to be a function of how efficient your models are modeled. It's going to be a function of how much capacity units, what SKU you have in Fabric, what the load is on that shared capacity, right? And know that this was a demo. It was cut and for efficiency. So I didn't abuse your time so that you could see exactly how the stuff worked, not exactly having to wait on the responses while it worked while we're having an F2 capacity backing this, which is the lowest you can use. So.
Well, and I guess related to that, oftentimes a lot of folks are looking and saying, well, great, I've injected Gen AI into something here. Does that mean I'm consuming tokens? How does Fabric data agent billing sort of sit alongside your base Fabric consumption?
Yeah. And I'm not the, expert on this, but there is a token aspect of this where these tokens convert to the different units that would be related to Fabric data agents. We can follow up with you on that. I know our team has done a tremendous amount of testing on this, and some of our engineers and architects have a very good way to measure exactly how much impact your agents have on your units that are consumed as part of your Fabric capacity.
We recognize when AI gets built into things, it often is a pretty evolving and dynamic space from how Microsoft chooses to pass the cost back. So I think those are some of the questions that we'll probably see answers to at FabCon too, is how are we going to pay for this? How are costs coming through? Clint asked, are we able to see the questions being asked by users and output provided by the agent? This might help refine instructions or provide an agent with further sample questions. I know sometimes observability is for early adopter products is kind of one of the things that sneaks in later in the process. What are we seeing so far in terms of getting observability on Fabric data agent experiences? I know early on Fabric data agents, like circa June, you would have to spool that off separately in order to go manually look at it. Microsoft hadn't built the observability harness while it was still in private and public preview. But obviously something super important as we think about creating production grade AI experiences. And we'll scroll through and see if there's a couple more questions here. We'll stay a little bit later. We recognize if you may need to jump. So again, our information's on the screen. If you're at FabCon, hit me up through the Whova app. I'm happy to say hello and make time. I'll take a couple more questions here. For example, How do you compare, Jeff? Oh, this is like asking you to choose which of your children you might love more. But how do you rate Fabric data agents to vendor built-in solutions like Databricks, AI, BI, Genie, or other things like that?
Yes, I knew that was going to come up. And
Ah,
honestly, I think, both have their strengths and weaknesses. Depending on if you're in a world where you're better together, you're using both Databricks and Fabric, then I encourage you to test both to see which one makes the most sense for your organization. If you're Fabric only, data agents is a great answer. If you're Databricks only, AI, BI, and the Genie spaces are a great answer for you as well to get a similar type of experience.
well, excellent. Two more that I see here in the chat. This one's probably a bit related to observability, but I know, for example, one of your demos, there were sample queries up at the top. And one of the questions we got was, can agent query history be saved or shared with other users? Like, oh, this actually worked really well to answer the question. So what are we seeing within the experience? I know we can always extend the experience to some degree, but
Yeah, so the query history does stay, and you can see that. I mean, in terms of sharing with other users, I'm not so sure about. I would have to test that. You can clear that history if you need to. For example, I cleared it to be able to write the demo because I was going through and querying a bunch of stuff, asking a bunch of questions, and so on. So,
well, and then you and I were talking about this from a security and compliance, especially for those of our customers who are in regulated industries. We got the question about on the configuration screen about enabling experiences. In addition to enabling cross-geo processing for AI, why do we need to enable cross-geo storing for AI? And I
yeah,
know we've wrestled this with our clients as well.
yes, and that's all it has to do within the context of the Azure OpenAI service. So nothing is going to OpenAI itself. This is Microsoft's implementation of Azure OpenAI, and it's staying within those security boundaries. Excuse me, staying within those security boundaries. So, but there is some storing of some of those questions that occurs in order to allow the agent to process effectively.
Well, with that, I think we've worked through all of the questions that were in the chat. If anybody, I know there's a couple folks still hanging on. If anybody we can take one or two more questions here, but feel free to come off mute and ask. All right.
Perfect.
Well, with that, thanks again for joining us today. Always great to have you. And again, feel free to reach out to either of us on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me via the Whova app for FabCon. And happy Fabric data agenting, everybody. Jeff, thanks again for sharing your time with us here.
Thanks, Jeremy. Really appreciate it.
All right. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. Thanks again. See you next episode.
Thanks, everyone.